Show with Pat Lopez, where we talk everything real estate. Today, my guest is Jason Saperton, VP of Business Development for Quain Oak Mortgage. Jason, welcome to the show.
Pat, thanks for having me. Always appreciate being on.
Great. Okay, so what we want to talk about is condos. July 5th, there were some guidance changes for mortgages when it comes to condominium financing. So tell us, what happened? Why these changes? Where did this all come about?
Absolutely. So we actually have to go back a couple of years to 2021 to see where these changes came from and what they are and kind of what caused it. So the impetus for all these changes was June 24th, 2021. Champlain Towers South in Surfside, Florida collapsed. This was a collapse due to poor structural design and a severe lack of maintenance. Nearly 100 people died in this collapse. And in addition to the loss of life, there was a massive loss of certainly money as well. And from the mortgage standpoint, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the agency that oversees them, FHFA, looked at it and said, okay, we need to make sure that we protect our borrowers and make sure that they're getting into a safe structure. B, our investors that are buying these mortgages. So June 24th is when the collapse actually occurred. And in a relatively short time, October 13th, 2021, FHFA put out new rules. They were temporary guidance at the time. In order to make rules official, there has to be a this is a federal agency, so there's a whole process they have to go through, but they can put in temporary guidelines. These temporary guidelines were put into place October 13th, 2021. And they were specific towards the safety and soundness of these condominium structures. Lenders are responsible for confirming, that they meet the safety and soundness. So there were extra steps that needed to be done on all condo projects that are more than 5 units.
5 units or more. And the deal with that is, heck, you can have some buildings that are 20, 30 years old, 40 years old. And, it's a little bit different if it's a brand new construction, but you have these older buildings and you have to make sure the maintenance is done.
Absolutely. If we go back to Surfside, just to kind of add to the tragedy a little bit, they were only days away from starting what was about $9 million worth of deferred maintenance and repairs. Now, obviously, if they had just started it, the collapse still would have occurred. But it just kind of goes to show that if you're not forcing them, sometimes they're not going to do it. So these new rules came into play. These temporary guidelines were put into place. On July 5th, 2023, an announcement came out from FHFA that those temporary guidelines were being made permanent.
Okay. So let's talk about the biggest thing, the biggest change. And that biggest change would be structural integrity. So what does a condominium association have to do when it comes to that?
So essentially, the condominium association is required to turn over to the lender all inspections that were done over the last 3 years. So if we're reviewing a project as a lender, we need everything for the last 3 years, all inspections that were done. They have to be reviewed. If there are failures and there are critical repairs or deferred maintenance outstanding, that loan is not going to be eligible for financing. You're not going to be able to get loans because the structure is going to be deemed unsafe. So the question then becomes, okay, well, as a lender, how are you supposed to make sure that there are no outstanding critical repairs? Well, and that's kind of where the struggle has been over the last couple of years. So we have to get information from the condo association or other parties that are involved. There should be some sort of structural inspection. At this point, many condos have had a structural or other type of inspection
So
completed.
So just so people understand moving forward, if they don't have a structural certification done, these inspections, they cannot get conventional financing, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. That is a requirement, correct?
Pretty much. Okay. So the challenge is, the rules sometimes are a little bit, they're not as explicit as we would like. But the rule is the lender must determine that there are no critical repairs. Okay, well, if you don't have a structural inspection...
Yeah, exactly. How do you know?
How am I supposed to be able to tell?
Right.
Okay, fine. So I can get meeting minutes. Well, what if they don't talk about repairs or inspections? It's a real challenge to be able to determine there are no critical repairs. And what we've been finding, and what I've found in different situations, is all of these condos, maybe they say they don't have an inspection, but it turns out they did have one. But
Right.
we had to get it from somebody other than the management company of the condominium. And that's where it gets a little challenging because, well, they don't want to turn it over because it says something bad.
Right.
And then we need proof of the repairs and things like that. So is it explicit in the guidelines? No structural inspection, no loan? No, it's not written that way. The reality is, if you don't have one, how can we confirm there are no critical repairs?
Right.
You have to prove a negative.
Right.
The only way to prove a negative in this case is with an inspection.
Okay. Okay. And then give me an example. You mentioned a property that, you thought was fine and it was handrails and there was an issue. So explain that as an example.
Absolutely. So an example that we had recently had was we had a condominium and it was actually some repairs being done on balconies. Okay. Now, yes, you can't go on the balconies while the repairs are being done, but this is not what one would generally consider to be a critical repair. However, when it was presented to the agency, in this particular case, Freddie Mac, they make the decision, it was deemed that those are critical repairs. So what we're finding, the challenge is that if there are any sort of repairs, right, many people are going back to the agencies themselves and going, hey, I need you to double check this. And the problem is that takes usually about a month.
Right. 30-day delay.
Exactly. So you got a loan in process, you get the information in, right? And we find out, oh, there's critical repairs. Another example that we had was one particular property, all the sewer pipes had to be replaced. They actually had porta potties outside for instances where people were unable to use their own personal bathrooms. They had to go outside and use a porta potty. In your own home.
Right.
So obviously that was deemed critical repairs. Fannie Mae actually had validated those were critical repairs. So there's so many. If there are repairs, the reality is if there's any repairs outstanding, they're probably going to have to be double checked. And all these condos that have outstanding repairs, what could have been a 30-day close, you're now looking at 60, 75 days.
Right. Now, and then also one would have to look at the budget to see if there's money for these repairs, right? And you get into special assessments. So talk about that as well. That's one of the triggers or something to look out for.
Oh, absolutely. So one of the first things that people usually get is the budget itself, right? And you look at the budget and the budget shows how much they have in capital reserves, how much is available to do actual repairs. And are there any special assessments that are outstanding? Now, these special assessments, the way they're done, it varies, right? You could, as a condo owner, you could get a bill for $25,000 due in 60 days.
Right.
And that's from the condo association. Guess what? You don't pay that. They put a lien on your house. They foreclose it.
Right.
So are there any outstanding special assessments where they need to fund the repairs is a huge deal. We need to make sure of our borrowers going into that. They need to know what is going to happen to them. One example that we had, this was where this rule really helped protect a borrower. The borrower was looking to purchase in a condo. It's the one that actually ended up having the sewer repairs.
Right.
In this particular case, the repairs were basically $1 million more than what they had in reserves. So this borrower was going to walk into a condo with repairs that were outstanding, that were critical.
Right.
May have to use a porta potty downstairs in their main area of their own home. Oh, yeah. And welcome to the condo association. Here's a $14,000 bill.
Right.
So we can do these repairs. And to make matters worse, in that case, the HOA dues would also obviously increase.
Right.
So these are lots of things that have to be looked at. And I know there's probably, especially I know you have a lot of realtors that listen to this. There's a lot of realtors that are probably going, well, wait a minute, this sounds new. This doesn't sound like 2 years old. I'm going to be perfectly honest with everybody. There's a lot of people, a lot of lenders that made an oops.
Right. And they're buying back loans.
So here's the thing, right? the guidelines that lenders work with, there's this book, really huge book. All right. And in the guidelines is all things about condominiums. Well, when they did these temporary guidelines, we have the book, and then separate in a lender letter somewhere
Right.
is this extra guidance. Well, if lenders are not diligent, they forgot about it. If they're not doing condos all the time, they forgot about it. Certain underwriters might have forgotten
Right.
about it within the lender. So yes, you may have done a loan last month in a condo project without a problem. And this month that condo project's not eligible. And the only thing that changed was the underwriter.
Right.
The answer is the previous underwriter oopsed.
Right.
They forgot about that extra guideline that they needed to look up. So these really are 2-year-old guidelines. And unfortunately, many people made the mistake of not following them. And we are seeing many lenders have to repurchase loans because they didn't even get the information on
Right.
critical repairs.
Now, and one of the triggers is if there's more than $10,000 of repairs per unit needed, then that's considered, critical, right?
Well,
Isn't that what I thought I saw?
so yeah, well, there's critical repairs itself. There are also, if you have $10,000 per unit in unfunded repairs.
Unfunded repairs.
So if you have repairs and you have, say you got 10 units, right, and you're short $100,000,
right.
it kind of doesn't even matter if those repairs are critical. That's ineligible. It's not funded. So it comes down to these condo projects, at least by way of allowing financing, are now being forced to make sure that there's not severe deferred maintenance, that they don't have, oh my goodness, we got $9 million in repairs. Let's do an assessment and try and do it and hope we don't have, the same kind of tragedy that occurred at Champlain Towers,
Right.
in Surfside, Florida.
Okay. So, and then on top of that, there was changes. I don't know the exact date, but there was changes with the occupancy because prior, 51% had to be owner occupied. So that's no longer the case. So what is that percentage for owner occupied and second home?
Certainly. So, one of the things about guidelines is that they have a tendency to sometimes to be fluid, and there can be changes. And especially we have a lot of people in the industry, both on the mortgage side and the real estate side, that have very long tenures. So a guideline could have changed 5 years ago and it might seem new
Right.
to some people. So some things about condos, investor concentration on conventional side, there always was a concern of, oh my goodness, if too many of these units are investor, is the project going to be ineligible?
Right.
Well, the current rules on that, it depends on who's buying it. So if you're buying a condo as a primary residence, then there is no specific restriction on investor concentration.
Right.
If you're buying it as an investment property, then they're limited. And even that investor concentration is higher than what people might remember. And
Right.
that's a 75% investor concentration, on that mix.
Okay, great. And then for FHA, you still have that 51% concentration. So FHA did change. Correct?
FHA has not changed.
Okay,
correct.
great. So this would be for conventional. Okay, and then mixed use, like there's only a certain percentage of condos can be commercial aspects. So what's that? What's that percentage?
Mixed use sometimes is really fun for underwriters because mixed use, right? So mixed use says no more than 35% of the total space can be commercial space. So that means now we need square footage.
Right. You have to figure
Okay.
that out.
How many units are there? What is the square footage per unit? Add that up. How much is commercial space? If that commercial space is under 35%, then we're fine on conventional. But yeah, that's where it gets into, we really need the HOA to help us out.
Right, they give you
and
the-
give us the measurements.
Right.
And correct ones too.
Right. Okay, and then ownership. There's some units where people may own 4 or 5 units in a building. So what are those percentages? What are those breakdowns?
Absolutely. So FHFA, Fannie and Freddie, they don't want too many units owned by they use the term single entity. And that's really important because single entity could be an LLC,
Right.
could be a private person. And depending on how many units are in the project is the limit. So for example, if you have 5 to 20 units, then only 2 units can be owned by a single entity.
Right.
Anything
Single
more
person
than
or
that.
an LLC.
Right. So if you've got a condo project with 20 units and one entity, an LLC, for example, owns 5 units, well, we exceed that
Right.
that limit. And if it's 21 or more, then it's just simply 20%.
Right. So that's a little bit more generous. You have 100 units, 20%, you're looking at 20.
Right. In 100 units, you got that same LLC that owns 5.
You're
You're good. You're under the 20%.
Okay. And then the other main thing that, people look at is delinquency on condo fees. And what are those percentages now?
Those percentages, so delinquency means 60 days or more. Okay, so how many unit owners are 60 days or more delinquent on their condo fees? 15% is the figure that they're looking for on conventional. If you're over 15% of your people are 60 days late, you're going to end up being ineligible for conventional financing.
Okay. And they're pretty much, I mean, there's other things, but that's pretty much the highlights of the biggest things that we see because every lender will order a condo questionnaire. A lot of this information will be on that condo questionnaire. And then I guess underwriting will be requesting to see if there's any kind of inspections, structural integrity, certifications or anything like that. They'll be requesting that as well.
Absolutely. And I do just want to make one important clarification. Okay. So when doing condos on conventional loans, there are different review levels, okay?
Right.
Well, and those vary based on just really all the factors of the loan, okay? And, everywhere from a full, complete project review all the way down to a potential project review waiver, okay? However, these new rules, these structural and safety and soundness rules, they apply no matter what.
Right.
So if you have a condo project that basically doesn't need a project review because it got a project review waiver, the lender still has to review the structural integrity. They have to know, are there critical repairs? Is there deferred maintenance? Are there special assessments? There's no escaping that rule. And when you think about this stems from a catastrophic collapse 2 years ago, it makes perfect sense. Because all the other rules are about ownership for the most part, right? And is anybody late and all about foreclosure protection, so to speak. So you could get a waiver because they're not as concerned. However, they're absolutely not going to let a borrower buy a house or buy a condo or a co-op when it's not safe.
Okay. Last question I have for you. With the waiver, typically, when would somebody get a waiver? It's more on the individual when it's run through the automated system that you get that waiver, or how does that work?
From what I've seen, that waiver has a tendency to be a combination of factors, both on the individual. It's based on how much money they're putting down, what their loan to value is, what their debt to income ratio is, what their credit score is, and the project itself. The agency, Fannie or Freddie Mac, may already have that in their system.
Right.
And they maybe it hasn't gone through an official, approval process, but they have the condo project listed as, being in there. They finance loans and the borrower has all these great things. And again, low DTI, low LTV.
And it could have been that they approved that condo with somebody putting 5% down and they have all the documentation from somebody else, 2 months ago or so.
Correct. So there's a lot of factors.
Right, a lot of factors.
The biggest factors are generally going to be the borrower and how much money they're putting down. Because like I said, a lot of that review is generally about the foreclosure,
right?
What kind of risk is there financially? But these rules that apply all the time are safety rules,
right?
Not financial rules.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think that was pretty good, and hopefully that cleared some information up for realtors out there who are dealing in the condo market. So that was some good information. I know some of that information for me was refreshing because some things I knew, some things that was updated. So I didn't know. So that was very good. So once again, Jason, thank you for being on the show. Well, that's the Real Estate Show with Pat Lopez. Be sure to follow the show on Facebook and Instagram, and be sure to subscribe below. Remember, the show is everything real estate. Be sure to listen, and also be sure to leave a comment, because I want to know some show topics you'd like me to cover in the future. Thanks for